Hey guys, we're gonna keep going with Of Wizards and Heroes by Story4someone on AO3. This is Chapter 4, Vesper Martini. The summary is, what do you even do anyway? Oh, this and that, Harry said lightly. Sales marketing with goblins, cultural relations with werewolves from Bulgaria, and the odd dragon who needs to be taken down a notch. The usual stuff. Yeah, and let's just move right into it. Tony Stark was not having a particularly good day. Not that there ever seemed to be many good days anymore. Ever since the Battle of New York, he couldn't remember the last time he'd slept through the night. Hell, right then, he couldn't even remember when he last ate. And then there was the company, and the damn suits, and this bloody arc reactor killing him every minute of every day, and then Pepper has the nerve to say he's changed. Of course he's changed. He nearly died saving all their asses as a human missile, but that wasn't exactly something you just bounced back from. You want the truth? Fine. He was just a man, a screwed up man with a brain that wouldn't function, and without his intellect he was nothing. And when all he saw, when he closed his eyes, was people dying, and all he heard was screams and gunfire, he just couldn't be Tony Stark anymore, let alone Iron Man. He was only human, and he couldn't take this anymore. Harry felt a tremor run through him, a rough chafe of wrongness scraping across his senses, and a wave of leaden discomfort shuddered through his body. His vision dimmed and flickered at the edges, blurring with exhaustion. He barely noticed the glass in his hand slip and shatter on the ground. Distantly, he heard people around him talking in jarring, distorted voices that broke upon him like waves. And why was it so loud? And then there were people touching him, asking if he was all right, asking for a statement, holding him upright, trapping him, and it was all too much. Just stop it. A quiet, forceful voice cut through the noise. It sounded strangely amplified, as though speaking into a microphone, though there wasn't one in sight. Distantly, Tony saw a dark-haired man step out from the crowd and move to stand in front of him. This area is off limits, and I must politely ask you all to quietly make your way down to the lower levels. A man from the crowd spoke out jeeringly. Who do you think you are, the cops? Nope, just a guy asking you to have a speck of goddamn decency and give us some space. The man's voice was chillingly calm. I was asking nicely, now I must insist. If I have to tell you a third time, the police will be the least of your worries. Now leave, please. Tony couldn't see the man's face, but he reckoned if the steel in his voice was anything to go by, his expression must have been something to behold. Within minutes, the room emptied. Tony exhaled, sagging against the wall. His vision was beginning to go dark again, and he blinked furiously. He couldn't pass out, not now, not when he was this exposed, and when he would see the very images he fought off sleep every night to prevent himself from seeing. Okay, Tony, it is Tony, right? A low, calm voice broke through his inner ramblings. I want you to breathe with me, okay? Nice and slowly. In, out. Good. With an embarrassing jolt, Tony realized that he was on the verge of a panic attack, his breathing shallow and unsteady. He looked frantically up at the figure kneeling next to him, a pair of bright green eyes boring steadily into his. I can't. Every breath tore through his lungs like sandpaper, and oh God, it hurt. In and out, Tony. Come on. The guy steadied him, and his knees buckled, and somehow that reassuring grip was just enough to not push him over the edge. Tony's hands flew out instinctively to grip the man's jacket, hands fisting in the material. The stranger was saying something else, soft words that spoke of calm incompetence and an overwhelming sense of safe. Tony let his head fall forward, exhaustion making gravity seem all the more ruthless. He couldn't keep the small, insecure act as it dropped onto the man's shoulder, and his cheeks flushed. He didn't have the strength to lift it. It's all right, the stranger murmured. You're safe. Everyone's safe. It's all right. How did he know that was exactly what Tony needed to hear? It didn't matter. As though a switch had been flipped, Tony gripped the man's jacket and breathed. Slowly but surely, his world stabilized. Silence. Here, eat this. Something thin and hard and vaguely familiar, foiled chocolate, was pushed into his hand. Tony glanced down and blinked. It was chocolate. Don't think, just eat. The man's voice was firm, but not unkind. You're running on fumes right now, and I honestly don't know how you haven't collapsed already. Surprising himself, Tony obeyed. He put it down to the stress. Do you often prescribe confectionery to damsels in distress, then? The voice turned amused. Only the stubborn ones. Tony gave a choked laugh, and finally looked up. The man's green eyes were hard and steady, but their gaze was warm. He seemed unbothered by the fact that Tony's hands were still gripping his jacket. "Do I know you?" Tony said at last. "Nope," he smirked. You'd have remembered a handsome face like mine." "God, you sound like me." Tony shook his head. "So, who was it then, Pepper or Rhodey? I should imagine they're paying you quite nicely to keep me out of trouble." The man stopped, bemused. "I'm not entirely sure what a roadie is, but I can assure you I'm here entirely on my own account." "Is that so?" Tony's tone said it all. "Look, in case you haven't noticed, I'm not exactly from around here. Harry, they're both 2 syllables, man. They're both 2 syllables." Harry offered a hand and pulled him up. "I'm Harry." "Harry, yes, that's my name," Harry said patiently. "The appropriate response is now to give yours." Despite himself, Tony felt a smile tug at his lips. Tony Stark, if that wasn't already blindingly obvious. Tony looked at him expectantly, obviously expecting some recognition. Harry smiled a little uncertainly. "So I'm guessing you're some sort of billionaire to have gotten into this fancy-do. He gaped at Harry. "You mean you don't... You just... Why?" For once, the genius was utterly out of words. "Like I said, not from around here," Harry said dryly. "I'm starting to get that," he muttered. What you did, making everyone leave." Harry's eyes flashed with understanding. "Back in England, I was in a war that lasted the majority of my childhood. Afterwards, I was a bit of a mess. I get it." Tony nodded curtly. "So," Harry wandered over to the bar, "since we've got an entire bar to ourselves, it'd be a shame not to take advantage of such excellent facilities. And I do make a fantastic martini, if I do say so myself." "Harry," Tony said with his signature smirk, "this could be the start of a beautiful friendship." "Oh no, I'm out of water. Oh no. This could be destructive. This could be disastrous. Nope, not buying it. You just told me there's a man who flies around in a metal suit powered by a mini power station in his chest and guided by an artificial intelligence called Jarvis, and you still think teleportation is unfeasible." Pepper stopped as she headed up the stairs, head cocked as she heard voices. "It's not just unfeasible, it's impossible," Tony insisted. "The semantics involved. Just think of it as a kind of transference via a wormhole. It's not perfect, but if a person harnessed enough energy and visualized where they wanted to go, do you have any understanding of the basic laws of physics?" Outside, Pepper started at Tony's voice. It sounded so him in a way she had barely glimpsed recently. Don't be sassy, Tony. It doesn't become you." Pepper stifled a giggle. "The instability," Harry continued as Tony spluttered, "might be due to the vibrations in the space-time continuum, of course, but that would require an incredible power source as well as an existing rift. Aha! So you're admitting it's possible if you could harness enough power and channel it through a medium. And what medium would you suggest then? A magic wand?" "Well..." Pepper was laughing so much at that point she all but fell through the door, and both men blinked owlishly at her. Harry was midway through making a martini. Tony was standing on a bar stool with his hands waving enthusiastically, both of their suits rumpled and ties askew like boys who had been playing when they should have been working. The effect was mildly comical. "Pepper," Tony exclaimed, "where have you been?" "I could ask you the same question. I've had no less than 12 people ask me of your whereabouts this half hour." Tony and Harry shared a look. Pepper noticed Tony looked slightly pale. "Did you know," Harry said before Tony could speak, "that our Tony here does not know how to make a Vesper martini?" Pepper blinked. "I know," Harry continued sadly. "I was speechless myself when I heard. Thus I made it my sacred mission to rectify this crucial gap in his education, so he should never be in such a position again. And this bar was so conveniently empty." Tony snorted. It seemed like too good an opportunity to miss. Harry winked at her. "Would you care for one, madame?" And that was how Pepper found herself joining the boys with an expertly made martini made in her honor. Harry was like a crackling storm in their midst, dazzling with his rapier whip and his smirk that spoke of trouble. And watching Tony, it was like having the old Tony back again. The banter, the laughter, the gleam in his eyes whenever he argued something he was passionate about. The light that came on when he and Harry went off on a conversation Pepper could barely follow. And more than a few times Pepper could have sworn Tony looked at Harry with an odd sort of puzzlement, and even a hint of something grateful. Not that she knew what Tony had to be grateful for, but anyone who could bring Tony out like that Pepper could have kissed. And all this coming from a boy that looked barely 20, a stranger they didn't even know the last name of. It was almost, dare she say it, magical. Harry Potter could not remember the last time he had laughed so much. Tony Stark, whoever he was an absolute genius, and Harry was often pushed to the limits of his centuries of knowledge to keep up to the man. It was exhilarating, to say the least. He was somewhat disappointed then, though not entirely surprised, when Tony started looking ready to collapse at the first light of dawn. As the first light of dawn began creeping over the horizon, he and Pepper shared an exasperated, fond look. "Come on," said Harry, "let's get you home, wherever home is. You don't want another drink? I think we've spent enough of both of our money tonight, my friend. You might be made of money, but I, unfortunately, am not. What do you even do, anyway? You never said." Tony yawned, and Harry caught him gently by the shoulders as the man swayed on his feet. "Oh, this and that," Harry said lightly. "Sales marketing with goblins, cultural relations with werewolves from Bulgaria, the odd dragon who needs to be taken down a notch, the usual stuff." Tony snorted. He seemed content to lean on Harry as he helped him down the stairs, with a very small aid of a levitation spell, of course, and out to a gorgeous Porsche that Pepper had brought up outside. Harry whistled. "With wheels like that, I wonder why you'd get out of a car at all. Meh, driving's overrated. Flying, on the other hand." Harry looked at him quizzically, but the man didn't elaborate. "You all right getting him home?" he asked Pepper, and Tony half fell into the rear seat. She looked at him strangely. You really care, don't you? You're not just asking that." "Of course I care. The man's brilliant, and he's lucky to have you." "You don't even know who he is." "He's Tony," Harry said simply. Pepper smiled slightly. "You really are something else." And then, surprising Harry, she kissed him on the cheek. "Thank you, Harry. I put my card in your jacket earlier. If you need anything, just ask." "Likewise. It's been a pleasure, Miss Potts." "Harry," Tony's voice drifted out of the car. What is your last name, anyway?" Harry smirked. "If you can find that out, I'll make all of your drinks, free of charge." "Done." Tony looked pleased. It was just as Pepper was getting into the car that Harry saw it. Silhouetted against the rising sun, a single figure with a bow strapped to his back crouched on the rooftop opposite the hotel, utterly still. Harry stiffened. He'd been a fool to think they would give up so easily. "Harry," it was Tony again, sounding remarkably with it in spite of the alcohol in his system. "What is it?" "Remember when you said teleportation was impossible?" he said a little resignedly. "I really hope you don't remember this in the morning." And just as Clint Barton released a dozen arrows from the rooftop, Harry span on the spot and disapparated, leaving nothing but a faint pop and a flurry of arrows hitting the wall as Tony's car pulled away. Did he just... That's not possible! He vanished! Disappeared off the radar! Do we follow him? And where the hell do we start? Agent's voice erupted in the surveillance room as they stared at the screen Harry had disappeared from. Someone had put footage on the loop, and the faint image of him flickering in and out of sight seemed to taunt them from the screen. Director Fury heard the word everything was thinking. Teleportation. Suddenly the trouble they had had tracking this boy began to make a horrible sort of sense. If he could disappear and reappear at will, that meant mutant or text genius. Fury had the sudden dreadful thought of two Tony Starks battling it out in science. That went way beyond the poor minds of the rest of the world. One genius was quite enough, thank you. Then again, maybe a mutant was more worrying, if someone out there had been experimenting on people with these kind of results. And then there was the most terrifying prospect of all. What if he was neither? They knew next to nothing about him. His very identity was a shadow, and his abilities were shrouded in mystery. If this Harry turned out to be an enemy, Fury didn't know what they would do. Hidden in the reflection of a shadow, unbeknownst to everyone there, Loki looked at the screen and smiled. So I was having, flashbacks through, the second half of this chapter. I was sitting there and I was like, wait, what if this is just like that other, I was like, what if this is that other one that I've already read a million times and I never finished because it just and then I was like, wait, no, that's the wand and the shield, or the shield and the wand or something. And this is of Wizards and Heroes. They're very similar, very, very much so, but they're different. So there. That means that I will still read this fic. That was Of Wizards and Heroes, Chapter 4 by Storyforsomeone on AO3, and if you haven't guessed yet, this is going to be a Harry/Loki. I think I already mentioned that in the first episode. See you guys later!